Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 17 of my 2021 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be using Lawn Fawn's Ho Ho Holidays and Holiday Helpers. So I've stamped out those images on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with Santa's skin, and for that I'm using E000, E00, and E11. And while I'm doing that, I'll also do the doll's skin. So I did a shadow under the hairline with the E11, and for Santa's mustache as well. Blended out with the E00, and then use the E000 for the highlight. Then I'm going to move down to Santa's beard, and for that I'm going to use W00 and W1, just adding a little shadow on the outside edge and on the underside of his mustache with that W1, and then blending out the edge of that with the W00 and let that fade into the white. I'm also going to do the little jingle bells on the harness for Rudolph with those shades, just to have that in one other place on the card. Just real quick and easy. And then I'll move on to Santa's suit, and I'm going to use R24, R29, and R39 for that. Starting with that R39 and adding a shadow up under the top of his hat where that brim would be folded over and casting a shadow, and then blending out with the highlight on the top edge. And then I'm going to move down to his jacket and add a shadow down either side of his body and also on the underside of his arms, making sure to skip over his belt and the hem of his jacket, and then color that little section that is between those. And then I'm going to blend that out with the R29. I also did his little pants, and then I'll fill in the rest of that with the R24. There is going to be a fair amount of red on this card today because I'm going to be doing a night sky scene, and those pops of red are really going to draw the eye and make the card look really Christmassy. So I'll do Rudolph's nose with those same shades, and I'm also going to do the sleigh. So I'm going to start with that R39 once again, and I'll do a shadow from either side and then also on the bottom edge, and I'll do a real thin shadow up under the top edge because I figured that's kind of like ornate, maybe it's carved out of wood, and that would be casting a shadow on the lower part as well. So then I'm going to work over the edge of that R39 with the R29, making sure that I have a really nice blend, and then I'll fill in the rest of that with the R24. I am going to do a second layer of that since it is quite a large image and I want to make sure that my blend is really nice. So I will do a second layer off screen, and then I'm going to fill in the harness for Rudolph with just the R29. There really wasn't any room there to squeeze in another shade. I also did one of the ribbons on one of the gifts with these shades, so it would have a nice Christmassy red bow on it. And I'm going to do the string on the sack of gifts with these shades as well. I didn't want the white parts of Santa's suit to be the same color as his beard, so I switched to the T's. I chose T1 and T3 to add a bit of shading to all of those places: the brim on the hat, the pom-pom, the cuffs, and the hem of his jacket. And then I did pull in the T0 to just help that fade into the white on that hat brim. And then I'm also going to do the gift with the red bow as kind of like a silver wrapping paper. So I'm just shading from the bottom edge toward the top. And I did do a second layer on there just to smooth that out and add a bit more contrast to the bottom edge. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to switch to some darker grays. So I'm going to keep the T3 and add in the T5 and the T7, and I'll do Santa's belt with that. So I'm adding the T7 on the outside edges and then a little shadow around the buckle, and then blending toward the center with the T5 and the T3. I also did Rudolph's hooves with these shades. I just put the shadow at the back of his body and the highlight toward the front. Then I did the wheels of the train, and I did the shading toward the back side of that. I also did the top of the train and the smokestack, and then that little front piece, and blended out with the other two shades. And then I forgot to do Santa's boots, so I want to do those quick, and I put the shadow on the inside of the body and the highlight on the toe. I wanted the trim of Santa's sleigh to be gold, so I went with YR20, YR21, and YR23, and I put the shading at either end, also on the little legs underneath, and then did the same for the bottom piece, and then I'm blending toward the center with the YR21, and then I'll fill in the rest of that with the YR20, just making sure to really catch the edge of that YR21 so I get a nice smooth blend. I'm also going to do the ribbon on the smaller gift in this gold combo and the front part of the train, and of course Santa's belt buckle. Moving on to Rudolph, I wanted to do him in some darker browns, so I chose E23, E25, and E27. So I'm going to start with the E27 for his shadows. I did a little darkness up above his nose, and also on the edges of his face and his ears, and then up under his head and down the back of his body and the backs of his legs, and a little bit at the top of his tail. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E25, and just making sure again to do those little circular scrubbing motions over the edge of that E27 to break up that really dark pigment and pull it into that mid-tone. And then I will come in with the E23, and I'm going to bring that almost all the way down to the bottom. I want his belly to be even softer, so I left a little bit of space for that. Filled in the top of his tail, and then I'll pull in the E21 for the bottom of his tail and his belly. And I'm also going to do his face with that. I'm going to use the E21 for the shadow, and then I'm going to blend that out with the E00. And I did go back and do a second layer of that E21. Then I'm going to do the doll as a brunette as well, so I use that E27 to add a little definition to her part, and then blended that out with the E25 and the E23. She reminds me of the little doll from the Island of Misfit Toys on Rudolph, so I just had to add her into this scene. And I did the little bear brown as well. So I'm actually going to use all 4 of the E20s that I have out for that. Even though he's kind of a small little bear, I wanted his face to be light enough that you could still make out his features. So I did add in that 4th shade, the E21, and kind of blended that out to make his face a bit lighter and brighter, and just filled in the rest of his little bits. I decided to do Santa's toy sack in brown as well, so I'm just going to use the darkest 3 shades on this. So I started again with the E27, kind of defined the little gathered parts at the top, and then shaded that on the right hand side with the shadows, blended out with the E25, and then I'm filling in with the E23. Then for Rudolph's antlers, I went with E27 and E29. I wanted them to be nice and dark, so I did a little shadow with the E29 and blended out with the E27. There's not a ton of definition there because they're really thin. Then my last combo is going to be blue, and I actually had my caps on wrong. So the colors that I'm using are B21, B26, and B29. I had the B24 cap on one end of the B29. So I'm going to color in the train and the small gift and the little doll's dress in blue. So I'm going to do the shadows with the B29, and there you can see the other end of the marker that was in my hand was the B29. And then I used the B26 for the midtone and then the B24 for the highlight. When I went to put these markers away and put the caps back on, I got very confused. It took me a little while to figure out what I had done. So somehow I must have done that the last time that I pulled these markers out. But anyway, it's all good now. So last thing I'm going to do for the coloring is grab my white Jelly Roll pen and go over Rudolph's little spots. And I also decided to add some plaid to the silver gift. So I did some diagonal stripes one direction and then switched to the other direction for the rest. And for the blue gift, I just did some polka dots. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. So I'm using a card sketch for our current Lawn Fanatics challenge for the concept of this card. And I decided to, instead of doing stars, just do some kind of a repetitive pattern on the background. So I'm starting with a Blue Jay card base that I've scored and folded to a standard size card. And then I sponged on a bit of chipped sapphire Distress Oxide ink. You couldn't see it very well. It was a very close match for the Blue Jay cardstock, but I am going to darken up those edges with some black soot. And I'm just doing the top two corners and then a little bit down the sides and making sure that is very well defined. And then I'll go back to the chipped sapphire to just blend out the inner edge of that. So the repetitive pattern that I'm going to do is rooftops. So I have die cut the rooftop border from Lawn Fawn out of some black soot cardstock, some narwhal cardstock, and some light gray cardstock that was just in my stash of like scraps. So I'm not entirely sure what brand it is, but I will look it up and find out what it was and put that in the links down below so you can check that out. So I did 3 of each of the different shades. And for the 2 darkest ones, I used black soot to add a little bit of definition to the bottom edge of each of those borders. And then for the lighter gray borders, I switched to hickory smoke. So I'm just going to add a bit of that to the ends as well. And I also die cut the top of the chimney with this same shade of cardstock. I actually think this is MFT Grout Gray cardstock, which I don't know if they make anymore since they switched up their cardstock. So I will look for something similar that I can link down below if it is indeed that color. So once I had the rooftop borders, like I said, I die cut the top of the chimney, and I did that 3 times. This card I had to do a lot of thinking on. It was a little bit hard to capture the vision that I had in my head. I wasn't sure how I was going to make it work, but I kind of laid out the different supplies and figured out that I could do 3 rooftops and 3 chimneys. So I die cut the chimneys out of Lawn Fawn chili pepper cardstock, and I don't have a dark red ink, so I'm going to use gathered twigs to add a little bit of definition to those. So I'm just going to sponge that on the edges and then also come in a fair bit on the top because the very top will be covered by that lighter gray cardstock. So I'm going to start adding my little rooftop borders down in the bottom right corner. So I'm adding a thin bead of glue, and then the first one I'm going to take all the way down past the edge of the card panel because I want that to look like it's continuing on below the scene here. And then I'm going to grab one that has a different ending so that they'll kind of like stack in between each other, and I'll layer that right over top. And then I'll go back to the one that is more rounded at the beginning and layer that one. And then I'm going to grab my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors, flip that over and trim off the ends so I can keep using them. That way I didn't have to die cut too many of those panels because there's more than enough for several layers there. So I'm going to continue that pattern up 2 more times. So I'll have a total of 5 rooftop shingles for this little house. So once I have that glued on and just holding that down for a few seconds until that glue adheres, I'm going to add a chimney right above that, slide that down while that glue is still a little bit wet so I can slip it back behind. And then over top of that, I'm going to glue down the little top part of the chimney. Then I'm going to switch over to the left-hand side of the card, and I'm going to start my second rooftop. And I wanted that to kind of be tucked under the edge of the first one, just to make it look like these houses are really close together and kind of like a Mary Poppins, you know, type situation with the houses in London there, just really, really close together. So I'll do those first 3 layers, and then I'm going to grab my Cutter Bee scissors and trim off the excess of those first rooftops, but then also the second ones so that I can continue on with the layers. I want to have 5 layers again for each rooftop. So this is where my concept was envisioned in my head, but not fully fleshed out, because if I had a choice to do this again, I would have taken another piece of colored cardstock, maybe like a tan or something, and tucked that under this roof and also the next one so that they didn't look like they're just floating in the sky without a house. But like I said, I had this idea in mind and I didn't know how I was going to make it happen. And I spent a lot of time laying out the supplies and trying to figure it out. And I was running out of time because I have to film with the daylight and the days are getting darker. And so finally I just decided I was going to go for it. And so I just started creating. And so, like I said, if I were to redo this, I would add, you know, just a block of colored cardstock underneath the second and third houses, or rooftops, I mean, so it would look like a house. But it's fine. It's just a card. And I actually asked my husband and my youngest son when they, you know, came into my craft room if they could spot what was wrong with this card, and they couldn't figure it out. So hopefully if you didn't think about it, like, you wouldn't even notice by the time all the little images are kind of filling in the space. So I'm going to finish up this last rooftop with 5 layers and then tuck the chimney down in that one. I did tuck this chimney down a little bit farther because I didn't have a lot of space left to the top of the card there. And then add that last little cement topper to the chimney. And then I will trim off those last bits of excess cardstock hanging over the side. And then I'm going to do some splatter detail to the background to make it look nice and snowy. So I'm mixing up this Gansai Tambi Starry Colors in the pearl shade and tapping that all over the background. So it can be a nice snowy Christmas Eve. And then I'll set this aside to dry. For my sentiment, I'm going to stamp out Happy Ho Ho Holidays in lobster ink. So I'll just make sure that I have a good impression there, stamp that down twice, and used my Twiddler's Nook Pressure Pal. And then I'll set that aside and do an insert for the inside of the card since I'm using that dark cardstock. I did die cut that with the outside in Stitch Rectangle Stackables. And I'm stamping out You're on My Nice List with Santa. And then I'm going to add the little nice list into his hand. That one is from Holiday Helpers. And just stamp that down again so it looks like he's holding it. So now I'm ready to start doing the final assembly of this card. I've die cut that sentiment with the smallest of the everyday sentiment banners, and I'm going to start with that because I want to get the placement right. I want to tuck it back behind that bottom chimney. So I'm going to have just the edge of that be under the top edge of the chimney, and then I will trim off the excess that's hanging over the edge. And then I'm going to start adding in my images. So the first thing I want to do is kind of cover up that bottom corner. So I'm going to use the sleigh and I'm going to set that into position, but I'm not going to press it down too firmly because I want to make sure that I get Rudolph's harness attached to him and that that string is going so that it connects to the sleigh. So I'm going to glue that onto him and then add some glue to the back of him and work real quickly because this glue dries so fast to just make sure that everything is in the right position. So I did have to shift that sleigh up slightly so that everything was connected. So my concept for this card was kind of like how Santa does it on Christmas Eve. So it's supposed to show him in fast action going from house to house and going down the chimney quickly. So I'm going to fill the sleigh with the sack of gifts, and then I'll put a few extra gifts kind of just sitting out in there because they're ready to go down the next chimneys. So I have the train and then the little girl doll riding out in front. I think she's so cute. And then I'm going to take Santa and I'm going to put him on the second chimney, or in the second chimney. I'm going to tuck him down inside. And then I'm going to have the small gift in his hand. So he is delivering that. And then in the top chimney, I'm going to add just a couple of extra little things. I'll have the larger gift and the little teddy bear just kind of sitting there ready to go. To finish up this card, I'm going to grab some Stardust Stickles and add a little bit of sparkle to the white parts of Santa's outfit. I did it on his hat brim and the pom-pom and his little cuffs and hem, also on his belt buckle, on the ribbons of the two gifts, on the top of the train and the string on the sack, the doll's dress, and Rudolph's nose and the jingle bells. Then I wanted to add in even more snow because right now it looks like it's snowing behind our different images, and I wanted that snow to also continue in front of them. So I'm grabbing my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. This works really well even on these darker Copics and cardstock. So I'm taking a little nail stylus and I'm just dipping that into the lid where I have a little bit of that ink and then tapping it here and there to add some extra snowfall in front of them and also on the rooftops to make everything look really cohesive. I'm also making sure to get different size little dots by continuing to dot that without dipping in for new ink for a few extra so that it really blends in with the rest of that splatter. Then I'm going to grab that insert and glue it to the inside of the card, lifting that up carefully. I should have done this earlier, but I just forgot, so it doesn't matter as long as you don't set the top of that card down while it's wet. And then I'll lift that up so you can see all that detail and give you another peek at the inside as well. If you enjoyed this one, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I'm trying to post them 3 times a week until Christmas. So if you're interested in any of these products, I'll have them listed and linked down below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 17 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.